He stole more than $9 million from real estate buyers, sellers, and lenders over 2 years. But the AG's office ended up prosecuting the case and sentencing Ryan Goodrich to prison and ordering him to pay the victims back. Hello, I'm Richard Pyatt, and this is Legally Speaking. For years, Goodrich ran Synergy Title in Syracuse and outwardly lived an ideal life. But behind the scenes, Goodrich kept the money he was supposed to pay clients for selling their homes, among other things. He didn't complete financial transactions. He kept the money. He tried to hide it, but our Assistant Attorney General prosecuting the case say his scheme ended up burying him in evidence. Wayne Jones of our Mortgage and Financial Fraud Division joins us now to share more about this case. Thanks for joining us, Wayne.
My pleasure.
So give us an outline of how Goodrich's scheme generally worked.
Well, there were three general categories of fraudulent behavior that Mr. Goodrich engaged in. First of all, he would purport to close on real estate transactions between home sellers and home buyers. He would take buyers' money, and instead of using those purchase proceeds as they were supposed to be used, he would divert them to his own purposes. And typically in the real estate business, after closing, purchase funds are supposed to be dispersed within 3 business days. Instead, the defendant would take the money. Most often, this would manifest itself in the defendant failing to pay the seller's mortgage.
So it doesn't really sound all that complicated. Basically he was the middleman between whatever financial institution and then the client or the customer, and then rather than pay the customer, he just kept the money.
Really, it was that simple. So when you sell real estate, you typically have a closing agent who's responsible for facilitating the conclusion of the transaction. So he or she, through a title agency, would take the purchase funds and then disperse them the way they're supposed to be. Everything's disclosed in paperwork, and that was his role. He's a fiduciary. He was a fiduciary, meaning that he had this responsibility to do what was in the best interest of the people he was serving, and instead he served his own interests.
But this was $9 million. This had to have gone on, we're talking 2 years that our case was based on. But how long do you estimate that this was going on? Did he get $9 million over 2 years?
That's what we believe. So, yes, the investigation involved approximately 2 years worth of behavior, but the behavior really intensified within a 1 year period. We don't know why that happened. We don't know what was motivating him to do what he was doing, but it all came about fairly quickly and just created a tremendous amount of heartache and difficulty for home buyers and home sellers. A lot of these transactions involved normal, everyday homeowners like you and I, and he simply took advantage of them. Many of them, a couple of them, I think expressed it very well at sentencing in saying, we felt that our home had been stolen from us. You know,
well, yeah, are they obligated for that money now, or he's going to pay some of it back, but not all of it? Are some of them out a significant amount of money, even with this case being resolved?
Yes, some of them are. I mean, some of the more fortunate ones were able to, hire lawyers and file claims, and some of these transactions were covered by title insurers, which would be the title insurance companies that underwrote the work that the defendant did, that Mr. Goodrich did. And so some of them were able to get restitution that way after a lot of heartache and grief. Others simply were left with the loss and with the destroyed credit. I think the saddest instance in this whole situation involved a man of modest means from Ogden who sold his home to the defendant, to Mr. Goodrich. Mr. Goodrich closed on the transaction, took possession of the man's house, took title to the man's house, but never paid off his mortgage. And the man ended up not being able to secure housing for himself. Eventually, his credit was destroyed, so he couldn't even secure a basic apartment.
Wow.
He ended up living in his truck for a while on the street, and then was taken in by family and friends. And he's never been reimbursed to this day.
Wow.
So you can imagine the impact that this has had on people's lives. And he was really no respecter of persons. People of modest means, people with millions, real estate developers, lost millions through transactions involving Mr. Goodrich simply because he didn't disperse the money the way he was legally obligated to do.
So there is a restitution aspect to his sentence, but it's only around $6 million, the way I understand it, right? How much is it, and how does that generally work? Why wouldn't this guy get at least partial payment back?
Well, it's just over $6.5 million. The reason is because, first of all, Mr. Goodrich has been sentenced to prison, so he's not going to be in a position where he's out trying to raise funds. As you can imagine, that could have disastrous consequences within the community, given his propensity to steal money. So at least the behavior's been stopped, and that was the state's first priority, and to punish the behavior and to deter others from doing the same. But yes, that leaves him in a position where he's not out, able to earn funds. As far as the state is able to determine, he simply lost it all. He doesn't have the assets. What he represented to the court at sentencing is that he got into house flipping and just got in too deep, bought too many, couldn't turn them around, couldn't pay them off, was robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, and eventually the house of cards collapsed, and the $9 million was lost. Now, it's hard to know for sure. There were a lot of cash withdrawals that were taken out of this trust account, which is not typically how things work in the real estate business. There were also a lot of undocumented withdrawals for which we're not really sure where they went. But for now, we don't have any reason to believe that there's money sitting out there someplace. It appears that it was lost.
I imagine that the Division of Consumer Protection was contacted by some of these people along the way. Were they noticing that they weren't getting paid after a reasonable amount of time and complaining?
Well, usually what would happen is that people would presume, once they'd sold their house and closed on it, that they had no further obligation on it. That's typically how it works. You know, the mortgage gets paid off, they receive their cash equity, and they move on. And so the way the defendant was operating, sometimes it would take weeks or months for victims to begin receiving delinquency notices, to realize, whoa, we still owe a mortgage obligation on a home that we no longer own.
Yeah, they thought they'd sold it.
They no longer have title to, and yet legally they were still on the hook. And so it would take a long time. A lot of these complaints came in through the Department of Insurance. The Utah Department of Insurance regulates and oversees title agents and agencies, and some of them were filed directly with the Utah Attorney General's office.
Did any of the victims indicate that there were any warning signs looking back that they could have determined that this guy wasn't bad? He seemed professional and everything on first blush? Yeah,
absolutely professional. He presented as a professional, and people really had no reason not to trust him. Home buyers and home sellers don't typically research title agents.
No.
Those are arrangements that are made through their real estate representatives, their real estate agents, whoever they're working with to do these transactions. They, in these cases, just ended up being caught completely off guard and having their lives essentially turned inside out by this man's behavior.
So we addressed this at the beginning, but it seems like his plans were just more brazen than they were sophisticated. He just had the gall to take their money.
I think so. I really think so. I mean, and it went beyond just diverting their money to his own purposes. He continued to re-victimize people by assuring them that he would take care of them, telling them that he had wired them the funds. He would even send wire receipts that he had concocted that were fraudulent documents, that were false documents that appeared to be absolutely legitimate and were worthless. He wrote bad checks. We have one scenario where a home seller took a $500,000 check that was supposed to be for the earnest money from the sale of his house to the bank, and he was detained there while police were called because the check was bad, while his kids waited out in the car.
Oh, wow.
And so the victimization happened, I mean, yes, at closing, but it continued to impact victims for an extended period long after.
Is there any way legally, now that we know that these people are in fact victims of Ryan Goodrich, that the system can accommodate the victims so that their credit's not ruined? Is there a way of going in there legally and amending the information, or is there any kind of result in compromise, perhaps, for the mortgage obligation that people can get since they're a victim of crime? Is there any mechanism for that?
I'm really not sure how all of that works. I mean, I prosecute the cases criminally,
Okay.
But I'm not really sure what remedies might be available to victims. The system really isn't set up for this sort of scenario. And I want people to understand that this conduct is really anomalous. One of the victims said at sentencing he'd been in the real estate business for more than 50 years. He'd been appointed by the governor to the Real Estate Commission, which oversees real estate licensure. He said he had never seen this sort of thing in his entire career in doing this sort of work, now as a real estate lender, that he had never seen this sort of thing. So it really is, we believe, an anomalous thing. We don't think that it's something that's going on in the community. And we think that by holding the defendant accountable and advocating for him to be sentenced to prison, that we have stopped this from happening and hopefully deterred anyone else who might think that this is something that they might try.
Well, part of the reason it's probably an anomaly is that you have this guy, he's not a cyber crime. It's not like you're ripping off somebody online and it's a faceless person. He was face to face with these people. He was like bald-faced lying to them and ripping them off and telling them that everything was okay. I don't think there's a lot of people that have that within them to be able to do that. It's one thing if you're stealing from people that you don't know or that you don't see. It's another thing if you're stealing from somebody that you're literally have sat across the table or desk from.
Yeah, especially someone who is fully trusting you and entrusting you with their funds. You know, for most folks, for the average person, their home is their sanctuary. It's their biggest financial asset. And obviously this whole system is reliant upon trust. People have to be able to place their trust in title agents and title agencies to do what they're supposed to do. And every day in this state, title agents do just that. You know, they do exactly, they're above reproach. They do exactly what the law requires them to do and handle all the monies that they are involved with appropriately. So this is really something that caught everyone off guard, not just homeowners, but and real estate professionals, but the prosecution as well. It's really kind of an unusual thing. Yeah. So I want people to be reassured that this isn't something that's rampantly happening, and that we believe that Mr. Goodrich received an appropriate punishment, and that he's been stopped.
Okay. So needless to say, I guess I have to ask, is his business Synergy title still in business somehow, or are they continuing to operate under somebody else, or are they gone?
Nope, gone.
Okay.
They've been delicensed, closed down. Mr. Goodrich has also had his license permanently revoked by the Department of Insurance, and he'll be barred from ever working. In fact, as part of the sentence, as part of the plea agreement, he's barred from working in any capacity in either the title industry or the real estate industry.
Yeah. So are there any things that people can do to protect themselves or get a leg up? Or as you mentioned, this was kind of a rare case. I guess if you, you kind of have to place your trust in these people. And since this is it seems to be a one-off, but it's always good to kind of be aware of maybe some things that are going on,
Sure.
I guess, in general as a consumer or just in general practice, right?
Sure. We have a lot of tools at our disposal today that people historically haven't had. So many times victims of fraud could avoid being defrauded simply by doing a Google search. These people have reputations. They have reviews online. Most agencies do. And it's something that you can look into. Now, I certainly don't blame any of these victims for not doing those sorts of things, because you just trust that these professional entities are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But there are if you happen to see any sign that causes you concern, I would encourage people to reach out to the Department of Insurance. They regulate title agents and title agencies, and try and determine if there have been complaints or problems. But for the most part, I don't think this is the type of thing that people really need to worry about happening on a regular basis. I think it was a one man on a crime spree, and hopefully that's done.
Okay. All right. Well, it's an interesting case. I know you did a lot of hard work on it, Wayne, so I thank you for joining us today.
You are so welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Okay.
Thank
thanks.
you, Rich.
And thank you for joining us on Legally Speaking. We'll talk to you next time.